So there is absolutely a good opportunity to join Norwegian Society of Texas. So ask us about that after this event. Right now, we are very glad to host this, or actually represent this book launching, and I would appreciate so many of you turning on tonight. Then I will definitely thank you and say welcome to our host for tonight, Jostein Mykletun, with the Norwegian Consulate General.
Good evening, everyone. Great to have you here. So my name is, for those who don't know me, I'm Jostein Mykletun. I'm Norway's Consul General in Houston, and I've been here for a little more than 4.5 years. And I normally say this when I speak publicly: if you don't like Houston, you have a problem, and I don't. Great to be here with you. A couple of words about the consulate. Of course, Inge, where are you sitting? You know the place. Welcome. Welcome back. Yes. We have been here for, I think, about 35 years, but it goes further back. The Norwegian consulate was the third one established in the United States. This will take about 3 hours. Established in New Orleans, I think, in 1906, and then moved to up to Houston some 35 years ago. So the core business of our presence here has to do with oil and oil and oil. But it has also to do with education, higher education. We are linked with all the 4 top-tier universities: Rice, Houston, UT, Austin, Texas A&M. We are involved in NASA Space, and we do a lot, sir, with Texas Medical. Yes, we do. Particularly with Emily Anderson. I've been here so long that I'm now the Dean of the Consular Corps of Houston. There are 95 consulates here. And we have a monthly luncheon. And today we have the luncheon with the keynote speaker being Dr. De Pinho, who is the CEO President of MD Anderson. And we had him in Norway for almost a whole week a couple of years ago, so he's well trained. That collaboration between Norway and MD Anderson started by Stavanger about 12, 13 years ago, and now includes the whole of medical Norway. Also with Texas Children, St. Luke, and a few of the other hospitals. The consulate, we, in theory and practice, we cover 10 states as well as we can. So it extends all the way out to Florida and up to Omaha, Nebraska. And the hardship part of my job is having to do also something in the Caribbean. It's Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands, sometimes Jamaica. So it's a fun place to be. And you know, Dr. Charles Russell, it's a great honor to have you here. And I just want to say welcome, and it's a true privilege to have you here. And just you can sit down a couple of more minutes, and then I introduce you properly. We're having an official book launching here tonight. It's great for Norway House, it's great for us, it's great for you to be here. The second time, the former time where we had what I call a literature-related event here was exactly 1 year ago. Some of you who are here now were there. It was on the occasion of a book written by a Norwegian author whose name is Karin Sveen. She wrote a book last year about Peter Satry. You heard of him, Peter Satry? He came to America a little before you and I, around like 1828. It's a wonderful book, it's a biography. And anyone here been to Berkeley? Sather Gate, the big iron cross gate, that's after Peter Satry. The name of the book is Immigrant and University. And Karin Sveen was here to present that book. And that's a wonderful piece of Norwegian immigration to the United States. And one of the things that this man did, he had basically high school and a little bit bank training in Hamar and Trondheim. He came to America when he was 22. He's one of the founders of Wall Street. One of the founders of Wall Street. He was in, he was in New York for a long time. And then the gold rush in California, he went out in 1850. Became a rich man, and then he donated the land for Berkeley campus. Quite an achievement. Your achievement is even more amazing. You keep writing books at a mature age. This man I'm talking about, Peter Seyfried, one thing he really regretted, he never got an education, never. So he felt rather uncomfortable speaking in public. He didn't have an education. He was very insecure. And he actually never went back to Norway. But he was the founding father of Berkeley, one of the best universities in the world. Charles, you grew up in Europe and the US. You joined the US Air Force in 1944. You flew 33 missions as a gunner in a bomber over Germany. And I just asked you a little while ago if you got shot down. You said, close misses, huh? You hung up there. And you have a terrific education background. You have a Bachelor in American History from Dartmouth. Very fine institution. Master, Columbia University, New York. PhD, Columbia University, New York. Quite impressive for a bomber. You became a professor at Boston and Columbia University and Dean of Matachuk Community College, Connecticut. And you married Inga in 1986. And it says you retired in 1992. I don't believe it, but it says you did. Yeah, and you keep at it. It's great to have you here. And before we ask you please to speak, I've asked a good colleague, Terje Odden. You know Terje. He works at my consulate. Terje, say a couple of words, please, about the books.
For those of you who know Charles, you know this is not the first book he's written. So I just want to mention a few of the other books, and particularly the books he's written about the Norwegian history. So the first one was a biography of Elise Wernskjold, the wife of Wilhelm, who we're talking about today. That book came out in 2006. It's called Undaunted, a Norwegian Woman in Frontier, Texas. If you haven't read it, I'm sure Charles is willing to sell you a copy tonight. Then 2 years later, he found, or during his research for that book, he found a lot of unpublished letters and articles that Elisa wrote, and he collected them in a book, and he called that Light on the Prairie. As a side note, that's a title I shamelessly stole when I wrote about Charles in the last issue of the magazine from the Siemens Church. So if you haven't read that, you also have a copy of that. That's in Norwegian, unfortunately. He's going to talk more about this book, so I'm not going to mention Wilhelm. But I also want to mention one book that I helped him reissue in 2012. That's actually the first book that was issued about Elise Wernskjold in the early 60s. It's some of her letters and articles that she wrote back home to Norway. It's called Lady with the Pen. It's for sale up at the museum in Clifton. And you can also buy it here if you want afterwards. So that's some of the things Charles has done before he started with the current book. And now I'm going to hand the mic. I'm not going to hand the mic over because you have your own. So with this, say welcome to Charles and the presentation of Wilhelm.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Consul General, for the wonderful introduction, and not only that, but the wonderful reception you're sponsoring here, and all the people who have come. And also, Terje, thank you for talking about the books. I might say, even though this is about Elisa, about Elisa's husband, she really was an extraordinary person. And the Lady with the Pen was the first book that was published of her writings. But the thing that is, and there were a group of writings that she had done which were not published at that time. and that is what is in the Light on the Prairie. That title was very carefully chosen because it's clear that her ideas and thinking came right out of the Enlightenment in Europe. I won't tell you any more about it, but let me just say her writings are fascinating to read, especially the Light on the Prairie, which has a document she wrote for her children here on the eve of the Civil War, and expresses her religious views, her dislike of slavery, and so forth. Okay, well, coming to Wilhelm, I also have to thank my wife Inger, because none of these books would have been written without her. Believe me, she took us all over Norway, visiting the places where he lived and where Elisa lived, and of course, we got up to the Nordkapp on the cruise, and many other things that are wonderful to tell about. Well, I was a college professor, and I was used to talking for an hour or an hour and a half, but I know I have to control myself, and so what I've done is create a PowerPoint show to run through the book, but also it doesn't finish the book because there isn't time, that much time, but it'll introduce it, and also I hope give you a sense of the fun of it. Well, Wilhelm, the story of a man. He came from Holland, Frederiksholm. That's where he grew up. And these are all places he knew: Moss, Robach, Christiania, Oslo, Tønsberg, where Elisa was married to Sven Foyn, later on the great quail man, Lillesand, where she came from, and so forth. I mentioned in the Wilhelm book the Skagerrak very frequently because you'll see when I show the next picture that that's where his city looked out, more or less, on the Skagerrak. Kattegat, Copenhagen, all over Sweden, and so forth, Stockholm. Well, now, this is a scene from the fortress overlooking Halden, Fredriksten Festning, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. The main part of the town that was the oldest part was down here. This is, I believe this is Idefjord coming out of, leading up into Holland. And it's this fortress was built in the 1600s when Norway was part of the Danish province. The interesting thing to do when you look at this book is you can read it like a novel and read it right through, because it has a pretty fast pace and that sort of thing. But also what I want to suggest that you might want to do is be a detective. Do what I had to do when I got the facts that went into this book. Knit them together. Come up with your own answers. You may find that they differ from my answers, but there are certain questions that are extremely interesting and fun to deal with in this book, and very difficult, some of them. So we go on to, this is another view of Holland with the fortress up over here. My belief is that Wilhelm lived somewhere back here on, I believe, Eldegate, which is along here, and there's mention of that street in his records and his book, in my book. Notice that one of the things about Halden and Frederiksholm is right next to Sweden. So that's one of the reasons this fortress is there, because the constant wars with the Swedes in the 1600s especially, and went all the way up 1700. And interestingly, up there, I went there once, and they had a display of the King of Sweden who was killed while he was attacking this fortress one time. That was, I've forgotten the name, but it was around 1720 that happened. And they, so we go on, and we come to, sorry, I'm a little bit slow here. Yeah, when Wilhelm was 17 years old, he started on burglaries. One of the interesting questions in the book, why? Why would he have done that? And you, as you read the facts, you can look and come up with your own answers. I have answers, of course, but here's his record. It's contained in this volume that is in the Norwegian National Archives in Oslo. And I went there back in 2003, and they allowed me to take these documents out and handle them, which is amazing to me. And wonderful cooperation with the Staatsarchiv, better than I get in the United States, believe me. And so had a wonderful experience there. This is the first page, but I'm going to show you a second picture of it, which shows Wilhelm's name a little more clearly. I don't know if you can see it, but there it is. Why it starts out with Ole Settleson, I do not know, except that Wilhelm was involved with crimes that Settleson was involved in. So in any case, unfortunately, these pictures, I couldn't put all the pictures in the Wilhelm book, so you're seeing these, and it's an original experience, and it'll go away, and you'll never see it again unless you go to the Staatsarchiv and get these out. One of the crimes he committed was a theft from a troupe of actors who came from Skien over the Skagerrak and were performing in Fredrikshall. The theater they performed in is still there. You can go and see it. And you can see the, the back, the way it was built exactly. It's a very fine theater, and it's a national historical archive, I believe, site in Norwegian history. Well, in any case, where did he steal the clothes from that troupe? Did he steal them at the theater, or did he steal them from their residences? And this is one of those kinds of things you can try to figure out when you read the book. Then the next point is that after he was convicted of his crimes, he was given a pass to go to Copenhagen. And this is an actual copy of the pass. It was, as you can see his name up there, it was given to him by the police chief of Fredrikshall, and it describes him, which is very interesting. It's all brown hair, blue eyes, his weight in kilos, and then it says that he used to go originally. It said he was to go by land, by sea, to Copenhagen. And didn't mention anything about Sverige or Sweden. He forged changes in the past so that he could go to Sweden. Now, at the time, Sweden and Norway were under the same king, King Carl Johan III, and he treated the two countries, even though he was king of both, they both had their sets of separate laws, and if you were a criminal, you could actually skip from one country to the other, and you could do that in the States and America for a long time, too. It's not unusual for, so in any case, he forged made forgeries in this past. If you buy the book and want a copy of this, we have them. This is a full page and a half, 8.5 by 11 page, and it's extremely interesting. It's a historical document. And if you want to practice your old Norwegian, you can do that. Well, this was the tube juice. Now, interestingly, after he was convicted, the first sentence he got was to what they called a slavery, I believe I'm pronouncing it approximately correct, a slavery, and he would have been very badly hard treated there. Well, as it happened at the time, the reform of criminal justice was going on, and I argue in the book, in the Wilhelm book, that his appeal went to the King's cabinet, and that King Carl Johan, better known as to me as Bernadotte, a Frenchman, King of Sweden and Norway, I believe he may have had something to do with Wilhelm's conviction, being sentenced to the tube juice, which was a workhouse, rather like the old poverty workhouses, and this was a picture, an architect's drawing. It was probably made around in the late 1700s. If you look at the spelling here, Tughws. Today it would be Troost 118, 1U. But anyways, the question comes up then is who was he and why did he start in crime? He was descended from Count Berenschild, who was a Dane originally and owned properties in Norway and had a big sawmill in Fredrikstad. And this is Wilhelm's great-grandfather. This picture is on the back of the Wilhelm book with the family shield. So, and his ancestors were descended from Count Berenschild were military officers. So he came from a good family. But the only trouble was that he was illegitimate. So he grew up with this stain on his person of being a, forgive me for using a bad word, a bastard. And so that got him in trouble. And so he was denied certain things. His father was in the was a sharpshooter in the Norwegian Army, a first lieutenant. This is a picture of sharpshooters that are on skis. And I knew that Norwegian troops had been on skis from at least the 1800s, maybe long before. But here they're walking in snowshoes, which really surprised me. I didn't know that. This is tells you that this man is an officer. The plume was a sign of an officer, and also the brass stripping there. And that's what his father would have looked like. He would have been dressed like that. So then we come up with a question of here Wilhelm is from a good family, but nevertheless an outsider because of his birth. And but then the question comes up: how did Lisa ever get hold of him? He was in jail, and so how did she find him? Well, you can work on that question as you read the book. You can read the evidence and see what you think. How did she find him? In any case, Lisa was the daughter of a Lutheran pastor who would have been in the upper strata of the society. And this portrait of her was made when she was 15 years old, and probably in Arendal, or in that area where she lived with her father when he had a church there. So in any case, it's a very interesting portrait. If you look, she's got nice curly hair and so forth. And Inger tells me she would have had a diaphanous cloth here because it would be unseemly for the daughter of the pastor to go with bare shoulders. And she's got a empire-style dress on and so forth and so on. But altogether, the portrait is rather stiff and formal and sort of like a sculpture. But nevertheless, it gives you an idea of what kind of a family she came. Oops. So, okay. Now, this is the actual house. Her father was related to Jakob Aall, who owned a foundry in Arendal. It's still there. If you go to Norway, it's a wonderful place to visit. You see a foundry from, the early 1800s, and they still operate it. It's a museum now. In any case, Jakob Aall's house is right not far from the foundry, and we had the good fortune, Inger and I, of being invited by Mrs. Aall, the current Mrs. Aall, to have lunch with her. These are folks who were in the local historical society she invited to. This is me, and unfortunately Inger isn't in the picture because she's the one who took it. In any case, this is all told us that this crockery would have been crockery that Lisa would have had meals on when her father was a pastor at Old Church. So here we were having lunch on this marvelous set of dishes that Lisa would have had her meals on, which for me was sort of a mind-boggling experience. By the way, we had a good Italian white wine, but I can't tell any more about that. Well, in any case, by the way, Mrs. Aall took us into Jakob Aall's library, which was, he had one of the best collections of books in Norway at his time. And so that was another wonderful experience. This is a photograph of Elisa that was done in Texas many years after that. There's some interesting features about it. You notice she has a black spot in her eye. I explained that at some length in the Dalton book, how that would have happened. An American physician who knew about childbirth and so forth said she was injured when she was being born, and this had the result of causing that eye, and also this one. Interestingly, this picture shows these finials from the chair behind her. It's not that she had little growths on her shoulder, but and of course her little bonnet and so forth and so on. Well, now she found Wilhelm, and for whatever reason, which we don't really know, but we can speculate on, she brought him with her to Texas. And they started out from Norway and from Dromach. And they went on this ship, Yggdrasil, which was a lumber carrier, and I think a rather wonderful name because you all know that Yggdrasil was the sacred tree of the Valhalla, or guarding Valhalla. And so this was a lumber ship, and they started out in that. They went to Le Havre in France, and explained why that happened also, why they went to Le Havre rather than going to England and to to New York. This is the ship they left on in Le Havre. It was an American ship, New England. It was probably built in Bath, Maine, and that's where I got this picture of it from the Maritime Museum. By the way, the first picture came from the Maritime Museum outside of Oslo, Bygdøy. Okay, well, they arrived in New Orleans in July 1847, and they took a steamboat up the Mississippi and went directly onto the Red River and jumped and disembarked at Grand Ecore. Here's Shreveport, that's where they were heading, but they couldn't get there because when they got to Alexandria, the water of the river was greatly reduced because of the drought, and so they only were able to go to Grand Ecore. Interestingly, you can't go directly from the Red River onto the Mississippi anymore because they built, the Engineer Corps has built huge dams here, and the Red River now runs into the Chafalaya, which I'd say roughly goes along this route, and that's to avoid flooding in New Orleans. So in any case, they got to Gaines Ferry, which is now under a huge reservoir. You can't, the town doesn't exist, or the place doesn't exist anymore. And it took them 2 weeks to get from Grand Ecore through to Gaines Ferry. If I suggest if you ever make a trip and you go to Natchitoches, or Natchitoches, Natchitoches, they pronounce it, you'll see that what a rugged country it was and how difficult it is to go through there. Even now, it's all forested and full of bayous and everything like that. So in any case, they got to Gaines Ferry. They went to Nacogdoches, which is a famous place that Daniel Boone, not Daniel Boone, but a fellow who was killed at the Alamo was there and so on. And then they went up to Brownsboro. Now this was the location of the first Norwegian settlement in Texas. It was called Normandy. If you go up there, you still find the old Norwegian cemetery. It's kept by a man named Charlie McCarville, and I understand that the board of NST is thinking about doing something to try to help support and sustain that cemetery, which badly is something, if it isn't kept up, it'll just disappear. Well, in any case, they settled, Wilhelm got land in 4 Mile Prairie, and which is about 35 miles from here to here. The main Norwegian settlement in Texas came about after, some years after they had developed 4 Mile Prairie in Brownsboro, and it's over here, Clifton, and that's where the Bosque County Museum is, and you go there and see a lovely collection of Norwegian, memorabilia. When Elisa moved in her very late life to Hamilton, and that's where she's buried, you can find her tombstone there if you kind of go. But in any case, after they got settled in Brownsboro, or they didn't actually get settled, Wilhelm proposed to Elisa before he had his land, but he knew he was going to get it. And so they got a wedding license, and it was in Buffalo, Texas, which is now not much of a community anymore. But it's interesting if you look at the spelling of his name, and Elisa is now Eliza, and Twenda, and so forth, and the spelling of, the old American spellings of the time, and the both of them. Okay, now, they were married, and this is another long story in the Wilhelm book, before she was divorced from Sven Foyn. Sorry, I forgot to mention that she was married to Sven Foyn in Norway, and her divorce took place in 1842, but for some reason or another, it wasn't made final until 1847, after they were married. So for a while, Elisa was a bigamist. And so one of the questions is, did she know that? Did she think something else? And that's one of the things that you could look at and answer the question yourself if you read the book. So in any case, they married. Well, this is the land they owned, and it's not hard to find because the 4 Mile Prairie Lutheran Church is on land they owned, and it's right near this field that you're looking at. This was shown to us by an old rancher. Inger and I went up there in the late 90s, I believe, and this old rancher took us to the land, and he knew where their house had stood, and he was able to point out where the house, which is now gone. Another picture of their land. This is the house they built, and you notice this is this open area